A state attorney is wrongfully arrested, sparking a fight against police bias and a corrupt system. Will she get justice, or will the system bury the truth? Watch the battle unfold. The Georgia heat clung to the air like a second skin, thick and heavy as Lena Harris crouched beside her black SUV in a mostly empty parking lot just outside downtown Atlanta. Sweat trickled down her temple, dampening the collar of her powder blue blouse. Papers and receipts fluttered from the passenger seat as she dug deeper into the mess. Muttering to herself, "Come on, where are you?" she whispered, her voice strained. Her heart raced, not just from frustration, but panic. Her purse was gone, and with it, her driver's license, her work badge, her whole identity. Her phone buzzed again. Third call from the district attorney's office. She didn't dare pick it up. Not without her Bluetooth. Not while bent halfway into the car with papers flying like confetti. That's when she heard it. The low rumble of a police cruiser rolling over the pavement. She glanced over her shoulder, just in time to see the squad car, slow to a crawl. The officer behind the wheel, a white man in his late 40s, was cut sharp enough to slice paper, watched her through mirrored sunglasses. Lena stiffened, then turned back to the car. Just focus. Don't make eye contact. But it was too late. The cruiser came to a halt, the door creaking open. Heavy boots crunched over asphalt, each step deliberate and slow. "Hey!" the officer barked. Lena froze, hands still gripping the edge of her car seat. Her pulse thundered in her ears. She straightened, turning to face him with controlled breath. "Yes, officer?" The man's gaze roamed her up and down. "What do you think you're doing?" "Looking for my purse," she answered, keeping her tone steady. "It's my vehicle." The officer scoffed. "You got ID?" "It's in the purse I'm trying to find," she said, gesturing to the cluttered interior. A beat of silence. Then his hand drifted to his belt. Step away from a vehicle. Lena hesitated, not because she didn't want to comply, but because she knew exactly what this was. Her skin, her presence, her car. That's all it took. She stepped back slowly, raising her hand slightly. Not afraid, just careful. But as the officer moved closer, suspicion radiating off him like heat, she knew this wasn't going to end with an apology. It was only the beginning. Lena Harris didn't flinch as the officer took a step closer. She held his gaze, doing everything she'd learned over years of navigating rooms where she was too often the only black woman in a position of authority. Stay calm, stay professional, stay alive. "I told you," she said evenly. "This is my vehicle. I misplaced my purse. That's all." The officer's jaw tightened. "You expect me to believe that?" She exhaled slowly. "Yes." But he wasn't listening. His hand hovered near his holster now, and his eyes, once merely suspicious, turned cold. "Put your hands where I can see them." Her stomach dropped. "Officer, please, if you just let me show you the registration." "I said hands where I can see them." Lena raised her hands slowly, heart hammering in her chest. Her voice trembled just slightly now. "You're making a mistake." He didn't respond. Instead, he reached for his radio, muttering something she couldn't quite make out. Then, with alarming swiftness, he pulled out a pair of handcuffs. "You're under arrest for suspicion of vehicle theft." "What?" Lena's voice cracked. "This is my car. My name is Lena Harris. I'm a state attorney. I'm telling you the truth." But he was already snapping one cuff around her wrist. The cold steel bit into her skin. "You can tell it to the judge," he said, voice flat. Her mouth open in shock, words failing her. "You haven't even checked the plates. Haven't asked for my name. Haven't looked inside." "Stop resisting," he snapped. "I'm not resisting," she breathed, fury and disbelief flooding her. "I'm complying." But it didn't matter. None of it did, because in that moment, she wasn't Lena Harris, Harvard Law graduate, youngest prosecutor in Fulton County, or the woman who had spent a decade fighting for justice. To him, she was just a black woman in a nice car she shouldn't belong to. As he led her toward the patrol car, Lena caught a reflection in the SUV window. Her own eyes looked back at her, wide with disbelief. This wasn't just about a lost purse anymore. This was about power, prejudice, and the price of being unseen in plain sight. The holding cell smelled like old metal, bleach, and regret. Lena Harris sat on the cold bench, her blazer rumpled, her wrists sore from the handcuffs that had only recently been removed. Her phone buzzed in an evidence bag across the room, out of reach, like everything else right now. She'd once stood on the other side of this glass, fighting for victims, for the truth, for due process. Now she was the one behind bars, and the irony was so bitter it almost made her laugh. Almost. A guard strolled past the cell with a bored look. Chewing gum like this was just another Tuesday. Lena leaned her head back against the wall, trying to stay composed, trying not to let the humiliation crack her armor. State Attorney, huh? A voice drawled. Officer Mulligan stood just beyond the bars, arms folded like he was enjoying a private joke. "You're going to keep running with that fantasy?" he added. "Lady, we've heard it all before." Lena blinked slowly. "You could have just checked the plates. Or, I don't know, Google my name." Mulligan snorted. "I don't need a search engine to tell me when someone's lying. You had no ID, no proof. That's what I go on." She stared at him. "No, you go on assumptions. And you assumed I didn't belong in that car." Mulligan's smug smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but he recovered. "You got a mouth on you. Better save it for your public defender." "I don't need one," she said dryly. "I am one." He gave a dismissive chuckle, but something in his posture had shifted. The arrogance had cracks now, small ones, but cracks all the same. Lena smirked slightly, the first real smile she'd allowed herself in hours. "I can't wait to see your face when someone makes that call." A young officer entered, clipboard in hand. Sir?" he said, hesitating as he glanced at Lena, then back at Mulligan. "We might have a problem." Mulligan waved him off. "No, I think you do," Lena said coolly, because soon the real show was about to start. And this time, the audience would be the entire department. The silence in the precinct's hallway was short-lived. Boots stomped hard against the tile as a figure in a sleek gray suit stormed past the reception desk. Mark Evans, Lena's longtime legal partner and a bulldog in court, flashed his badge at the nearest officer like a man on a mission. "Where is she?" he snapped. The front desk officer stammered, eyes wide. Holding room 3, sir." Without another word, Mark was off, in the holding room. Lena sat with her arms crossed, a thin line of sarcasm pulling at her lips. Across from her, Mulligan leaned against the wall with that same tired smirk, tapping his nightstick against his thigh like it was some kind of drum solo. "So," he said, voice thick with smugness, "any moment now, you gonna break character, counselor?" Before Lena could answer, the door flung open. Mark filled the frame like a storm cloud. "Mulligan," he said, calm as a razor. "Out!" The officer blinked. "Excuse me." "You heard me. Step out of the room. Now!" Mulligan scoffed but moved slowly, clearly unsure. Mark stepped in without waiting for him to clear the doorway. "You okay?" he asked Lena, his eyes scanning her face, then her wrists. "I've been better," she replied dryly, "but I've had worse coffee." Mark turned to the younger officer at the door. "Get the watch commander. Tell him the state attorney's office is here, and we've got a live one." The kid bolted like his shoes were on fire. Mulligan, now visibly annoyed, turned back toward them. "Hold on, what's the meaning of—" Mark stepped in close, his voice dropping. "You arrested Lena Harris, Assistant State Attorney of Fulton County. No ID required, just a phone call, one you never bothered to make." For the first time, Mulligan's expression cracked. His mouth opened, but nothing came out. "You're finished," Mark said flatly. "We'll let the chief confirm it." Lena, sitting coolly behind the glass, gave Mulligan a little wave. "Told you this was going to be fun." Mark smirked. "This isn't the end. This is just the trailer. The real show starts now." And judging by the looks on every face in the precinct, opening night had arrived. The conference room reeked of old coffee and tension. Lena sat at the far end of the table, spine straight, jaw locked, eyes steady. Across from her, Officer Mulligan fidgeted like a man who knew the hammer was about to fall, and there wasn't a damn thing he could do to stop it. Chief Ramirez entered with a thick folder in hand, his expression unreadable. He dropped the file on the table with a heavy thud that made Mulligan flinch. "Let's not waste time," the chief said. "We've reviewed the footage. We've read the report. We've spoken to the witnesses." Mulligan's voice cracked as he tried to defend himself. "Sir, with all due respect, the situation looks suspicious. You handcuff a sitting state attorney in broad daylight for searching her own car." Chief Ramirez barked. "Suspicious is a defense. It's an excuse." Lena kept her gaze locked on Mulligan, not out of spite, but because she wanted him to see her, see the woman he'd dismissed, the one he'd underestimated. "Again, you ignored protocol," the chief continued. "You didn't verify her plates. You didn't run her name. You didn't even try to de-escalate." Mulligan's face flushed red, equal parts rage and embarrassment. I thought she was..." "What?" Lena finally spoke, her voice sharp. "Not the kind of person who drives a black Escalade. Not the kind of woman who wears a blazer instead of a badge." The room fell into stunned silence. The chief turned to Lena, his voice calmer now. "Miss Harris, on behalf of this department, I offer our apology. What happened to you is unacceptable." Lena didn't blink. "Apologies don't fix patterns. They just patch over them." The chief nodded solemnly. "Which is why Officer Mulligan is being relieved of duty, effective immediately." Mulligan's chair scraped back as he stood, sputtering. "This is insane. I've been on the force 22 years. And that's 22 years too long if you can't tell the difference between prejudice and policing," Ramirez snapped. As Mulligan stormed out, Lena exhaled, not in relief, but in resolve. One man was gone, but the system? The real fight was only just beginning. By the next morning, Lena Harris was on every local news channel in Chicago. "State Attorney wrongfully arrested in parking lot," read the headline on Channel 5. Her face was plastered across the screen, confident, composed, but the tension behind her eyes still visible. Social media had already taken over before her coffee even brewed. Clips of the incident, leaked body cam footage, and a photo of Mulligan escorting her in handcuffs had gone viral. One meme showed Mulligan with the caption, "When you arrest a boss by mistake." Lena wasn't laughing, but she wasn't hiding either. As she walked into her office at the Cook County State Attorney's building, the energy was different. Her assistant, Carla, stood by the door holding a tablet. "You've got 4 interview requests, 2 op-ed offers, and someone from The Daily Show wants you to guest star." Lena raised an eyebrow. "The Daily Show?" Carla shrugged. "They said you got the face of justice with the patience of a saint and the hands of someone ready to throw down." "Their words, not mine." Lena smirked. "I'll pass for now." As she stepped into her office, her phone buzzed again. A message from her cousin flashed on the screen. "Girl, you're trending. Just saw a TikTok of you dragging that cop with your eyes. Fire nail polish medium dark skin tone." Lena shook her head and laughed. Just once. The absurdity of it all hadn't escaped her. One day she was reviewing legal motions. The next she was a walking, talking symbol of police bias. But this wasn't about going viral. She picked up the phone and called her friend, Councilman Jerome Price. "We need to talk about the Oversight Committee." "You want in?" he asked. "No," Lena replied, her tone serious. "I want to run it." A pause. Then, "Hell yeah, Lena. Let's make it happen." She hung up and looked out over the city. There was still a long road ahead. Meetings, legislation, reforms. But at least now the spotlight was on. And this time, she'd make sure it stayed there until something real changed. Because entertainment wasn't justice. But if the world wanted to watch, she'd give them a show worth remembering. Officer Mulligan stared at the floor as Chief Ramirez laid down the verdict. "Effective immediately, you are terminated from the Chicago Police Department." The room was still, the silence sharper than the words. Mulligan's jaw tensed, his shoulders tight beneath the crumpled weight of a uniform that had once felt like armor. Not anymore. Lena Harris stood just behind the chief, hands folded, her presence unshakable. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. Her victory was too important for theatrics. "This is ridiculous," Mulligan muttered under his breath. "What was that?" Ramirez's voice was low but firm. Mulligan raised his head. 21 years on the job. One mistake. One mistake. Lena interrupted, stepping forward. Her tone was even, but her words cracked like a whip. You escalated a peaceful situation, ignored basic procedure, racially profiled me, and arrested a public official without verifying identity. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern. Ramirez didn't stop her. And let's not forget, she added, turning slightly to address the other officers in the room. This wasn't about me. It's about everyone who doesn't wear a badge or a suit and still gets treated like a threat. The officers shifted uncomfortably. Mulligan's cheeks flushed red, and not from shame. Rage boiled beneath his skin, but there was nothing left for him to say. No one came to his defense. You may collect your personal items and leave the premises, Ramirez said. Mulligan stood slowly, as if dragging the last of his dignity behind him. He glanced at Lena one final glare, but her expression didn't budge. Don't look at me, she said calmly. Look in a mirror. Later that day, Lena walked out of the station to a flurry of cameras. Reporters shouted her name. Microphones reached for her words. She raised a hand, signaling them to pause. I'm not here for the headlines, she said clearly. I'm here for change. This is a first step, but it won't be the last. Behind her, Mulligan was just a silhouette slipping into the back of a squad car. Not in cuffs, not in disgrace, just gone. But Lena knew the story wasn't over. Not yet. She'd gotten justice for herself. Now she was ready to fight for everyone else. And this time the whole city was watching. 3 days later, Lena Harris sat across from Chief Ramirez in a private conference room on the 10th floor of the station. The city skyline framed the window behind him, a reminder of just how high the stakes had become. He slid a folder across the table toward her. We're creating an independent oversight committee, he said. You'd have full access, training materials, body cam footage, policy drafts. We want this department to change, Lena, and we need someone who won't let us fake it. Lena didn't reach for the folder. She simply stared at it, like it might burn her fingers. You mean you want a black woman in the room, so you can say you're listening. Ramirez blinked, caught off guard. I'm not interested in being a face, she said. I'm interested in being a voice. And voices don't work well when they're being muzzled. He nodded slowly. No muzzling. Total transparency. You'll have teeth. She leaned back in her chair, arms crossed. And when I start calling people out publicly, what then? Then we handle it, he said. We don't hide from it. Lena finally opened the folder. Inside were drafts for a new training protocol, mandatory de-escalation courses, implicit bias workshops, use of force accountability forms. She skimmed the first page, then looked up again. I want my own people on this committee, not just department picks. You'll have them, Ramirez replied. Her expression softened slightly. This isn't about cleaning up Mulligan's mess, she said. This is about never letting another Mulligan happen again. He nodded again, slower this time. That's exactly the point. An hour later, Lena stepped out of the building and into the sunshine. She was met not by reporters, but by neighbors, local leaders, activists, even a group of college students holding signs that read, "Justice means reform," and "We got your back, Lena." She raised a fist in acknowledgement, and the crowd erupted into cheers. A college girl with a nose ring jogged up beside her. You really joined the committee? Lena grinned. No, I'm building it. The girl hooped and ran off to tell the others. For the first time in weeks, Lena laughed. Deep, full, real. Change was coming, and it had her name written all over it. Lena Harris stood at the front of a packed community center in southeast Atlanta. The room was filled with folding chairs, most already taken. Neighbors, parents, activists, young professionals, and even a few off-duty officers sat side by side, all watching her with mix of curiosity and quiet expectation. The walls were covered with posters. Know your rights. Police transparency now. Justice starts with us. She cleared her throat, gripping the podium a little tighter than necessary. When I was arrested 2 weeks ago, she began, it wasn't because I broke the law. It wasn't because I posed a threat. It was because of how I looked, where I was, and what someone assumed about me. The room stayed silent, listening, waiting. That officer didn't know my name. He didn't care. But I knew his type. I've known them my whole life. People who see authority as a license to dominate, not to serve. She let that hang for a moment. But here's the thing, she continued. What he didn't know, what he refused to even check, was that I'm the state attorney. I've spent the last 10 years in courtrooms trying to make sure people like you don't get railroaded, that kids don't go to prison for petty offenses, that people's lives don't get torn apart because of one biased call. An older woman in the front row dabbed her eyes. But on that day, none of it mattered. My degree didn't matter. My job didn't matter. All he saw was someone who didn't belong. Lena paused, letting the moment settle. I don't tell you this for sympathy, she said. I tell you this because I realized something that day, something I should have understood more deeply a long time ago. She scanned the crowd. You don't fix a broken system from the top down. You fix it by listening to the people who live with it every day. You fix it by sharing power, by holding people accountable, not just when it's easy, but especially when it's hard. The audience nodded. Some clapped quietly. This isn't about revenge, she finished. It's about responsibility. And I'm taking mine seriously. I hope our city will do the same. There was a pause, then a standing ovation. Lena stepped back from the mic, her heart pounding, not from fear, but from resolve. Lesson learned. Titles don't protect you. But truth can move mountains. It was just after 8 a.m. when Lena Harris stepped into the new Oversight Committee's first closed-door session at Atlanta's Public Safety Administration building. The conference room buzzed with quiet tension. At the far end of the table sat Chief Vernon Ellis, flanked by legal consultants, community leaders, and a pair of civil rights attorneys Lena had worked with in courtrooms for years. Everyone stood when she entered, not out of obligation, but out of respect. The air carried the weight of everything that had come before. The wrongful arrest, the public apology, the termination of Officer Brandt, and the firestorm of local attention that followed. Lena took her seat, not as a victim, not as a symbol, but as a professional ready to rebuild the very system that failed her. Chief Ellis cleared his throat. Miss Harris, he began, I want to start today by thanking you for not walking away. Lena offered a curt nod. I didn't stay for thanks. I stayed for results. The meeting began. Talks of revised de-escalation training, mandated cultural sensitivity courses, new body cam accountability procedures. On paper, it sounded promising. But Lena had read too many promises that never made it past policy drafts. When the room paused for input, she leaned forward, her voice clear. If you're serious about change, it can't end with checking boxes. It means transparency in complaints, consequences for cover-ups, and real investment in communities, not just more patrols. The table went quiet. Eyes turned toward her, some uneasy, some nodding. You can write protocols all day, she continued, but until people feel like their lives actually matter to this department, you haven't done a thing. A soft murmur of agreement followed. Later that evening, Lena stood outside the station, sipping coffee, her breath visible in the cool Georgia air. Mark joined her, hands in his pockets. You were tough in there, he said. I had to be. Mark smiled. You think they'll actually follow through? Lena looked out across the parking lot. Empty, quiet. They'll try, but I'll be watching. The lesson? Justice isn't a moment. It's a movement. It doesn't end when apologies are made or someone gets fired. It begins when those in power start listening, and those who've been silenced refuse to back down. And Lena Harris? She wasn't backing down. Not now. Not ever.